Sorry for the hold-up, folks. There seems to be a slow-moving train up ahead.
Guess who? Yup. Just called to tell you I still don't know why I called. But I'm thinking about it.
Fish are friends.
Fish are friends. Fish are friends. Not food.
WDW Radio. Your information station.
Hello, my friend, and welcome to the WDW Radio Show, your Walt Disney World information station. I am your host, Lou Mongello, and this is show number 593. And I'm here once again, not only to help you have the best possible Disney vacation experience when you go to the parks, but I also want to bring you some of that Disney magic wherever you are with the podcast, live video broadcast, and chats every Wednesday night on Facebook, blog, books, audio tours, and more. Whether it's your first time visiting or you've been to the parks hundreds of times, if you're planning your next Disney vacation or just love the history, details, secrets, and stories, there's something in the show for you, because each week I'm going to take you from the parks to the screens and everything in between. And if you're a new listener, welcome, thank you. Please go back and check out some of the past episodes for interviews, top 10s, reviews, and more. You can subscribe to the podcast in Apple Podcasts or your favorite podcast player and find everything else at WDWRadio.com. And of course, be part of the community and conversation by going to WDWRadio.com/community. Part of what makes the hero's journey in storytelling so memorable are the characters that sometimes help make them heroic. And in many cases, for every great hero, there's an equally evil villain. So this week, we're going to look at our top 10 Disney villains, including those from the Marvel and Star Wars universes. We'll explore in depth what makes a good or bad villain, their story arc, motivations, sympathies, relationships, and what else makes up and drives their character. We'll also discuss Walt Disney, the evolution of the Disney villain, some non-traditional villains, who is on our lists and why, and of course, I want to hear from you and your best or worst Disney villain as well. I'll then have the answer to our last Walt Disney World Trivia Question of the Week, and I'll pose a new challenge for your chance to win a Disney Prize package. Then stay tuned to the end of the show for more information, updates, your voicemails, and more. So sit back, relax, and enjoy this week's episode of the WDW Radio Show. Recently, on show 582, we looked at our top 10 Disney heroines and some of the many important women in Disney history who weren't just groundbreaking female leads, but I think really rose to the level of global cultural icons and inspiring role models and true heroines. And we talked about some of the qualities and characteristics that each of them possessed that I think really made them so important and so influential as well. And I think obviously for every protagonist, there is an antagonist, good guy, bad guy, character or characters whose stories are bound together, usually until the very end. And so if we're going to look at some of the heroes, we also need to look at their counterparts. And this week, we're going to explore our top 10, insert ominous music here, Disney villains. And like one of the villains that may or may not be on the list, I've got friends on the other side. And so I want to welcome back to the show little Timmy Foster from Celebrations Magazine and Guide to the Magic. Back to the show.
Thanks. I was a little worried about the introduction and how it would go on this show. My favorite bad guy, my favorite villain. He puts the evil in villains. But you didn't, and I appreciate it.
I thought long and hard about it. I'm going to save some of those for later. But
I'm sure.
Tim, from every good story, from every good Disney movie, many villains are not defeated alone.
No, they're not.
It took a team of Avengers to beat Thanos.
We need
And
some help.
I'm not so sure, Tim, that you and I are qualified to tackle these baddies on our own.
Not even close.
So I'm bringing in the big guns.
Yes.
A man who, like Zangief from the video game series Street Fighters,
And I say, Zangief, you are bad guy. But this does not mean you're bad guy.
he's a bad guy, but it doesn't mean he's a bad guy. He's actually my favorite hero with a little bit of villain that comes out every so often as he is in his teenage years. My son, my man, Nicholas Peter Mangello.
He brought Marion on for the heroes, and then he brought the most evil one on for the villains.
Now, look, I thought this would be fun getting together. I think it's only fair for her to come on and talk about the heroines and you to come on to talk about the villains. And, you know, when we talk, just like when we did the heroines, when I say Disney villains, I'm really talking about all those characters that sort of now fall under the Disney umbrella. And before we get into our list, guys, I want to I think we need to discuss what we are really discussing. And what does it mean?
Oh, wait, here come the rules that I wasn't told about.
It's a question for you, right? Because what does it mean to be a top or a best Disney villain? Is it the best villain? Is it the worst villain? Like, what are some of the things that you thought of that helped you prepare your list? Because again, we don't talk, I just sort of throw out the topic. We don't talk about it ahead of time. So Tim, then Nicholas, what for you, like, what did you take into account when you were thinking about your top Disney, Marvel, Star Wars villain?
To be a good villain, they need to be relatable, extremely evil, and fun to watch, in my opinion.
So Tim Foster's number one on your list because he's
No,
fun.
you are.
Thank you.
So I think that's interesting because I think you use words there. They're going to come up definitely more than once. Tim, what about you?
Well, honestly, I as usual, made my list with the intention of trying to pick ones you weren't going to pick. So there's that. No, but I did go through because I was thinking of that. And am I going for the baddest of the bad or the most in-depth character or the character maybe that gets redeemed? I realized there was a lot of different takes on all these villains. So I actually tried to spread it around a little bit, maybe have some conversation about the more ambiguous definitions of a villain or how they played out in the end and that sort of thing. So,
right. Are you spreading the love or are you spreading the hate? Right. Because for me, I did not base my list on their quote unquote powers per se. I took a lot of different factors into account. Their story arc, their motivation, are they sympathetic, right? Or even the portrayal and performance, especially for some of the live action, the live characters that are portrayed. And I think, you know, we have to sort of think, you know, what is a villain? Sort of what defines a villain? And I know a lot of ones that I think we'll probably talk about in the Disney, Marvel, Star Wars context. A lot of these villains are doing things because they believe, you know, they believe what they're doing is the quote unquote right thing, right? So that's what I mean. Like, what are the things that help make them good villains? Like for me, I think, you know, is there a level of unpredictability in there? Is there nobility in the cause, but evil in the execution? Right? What's their backstory? What's their motive like? And some of the balance that I think some of these characters maybe should or should not have, right? How do they balance some of the evil qualities of, you know, anger and jealousy and pride and greed with a potential moral compass, which some may or may not have? And what's the relationship like too? Because I think for every good villain, you need to have a good hero counterpart.
Exactly.
Did you take all those factors in consideration, Nicholas?
100%.
You know, and I thought too, you know, because we were talking about Disney sort of as a whole, you know, we hear the question all the time. Well, what would Walt think? What would Walt do? And I really tried to figure out and answer the unanswerable question, one that certainly we can't, figure out. But I did find a quote from Andreas Deja, who's obviously a renowned Disney animator. If you watch the special edition Blu-ray of Sleeping Beauty, he actually talks about what Walt wanted, at least at the time, in terms of villains in animated films. And he said, and I'm quoting, Walt wanted to have the villains in the animated films be interesting. There had to be something about them that you recognize as a human quality, that's something that is beyond just bad. And I think that's really interesting as we sort of apply that to some of the villains that are going to be on our lists. And I have a take that I think is interesting that we'll talk about as we start to go through, because I think, to answer my own question, the definition of a villain or what a good villain is in some of those villains' journey, much like the hero's journey, has changed drastically over the years from Walt's time to today, and I will try and back that up with some evidence. But I want to get right into your list. And Tim, because I have a feeling that you are furiously scribbling it in crayon on a Post-it note right now, I want to know from you first, and then you, Nicholas, what is the first villain on your list? Is it the baddest of the bad? Is it the least bad of the bad? Is it the best of the worst? Like, who is the villain, and why is he on this part of your list?
Well, as usual, that answer changed in the last several minutes as you were talking, as I kept reevaluating my list. You know what? I thought, since you did qualify that all of Disney-dom counts in this, Star Wars, Marvel, maybe we'll start in the Marvel world before we dive into Disney-dom here. And I don't know if you guys have Marvel on your lists.
Have you met us before?
Well, because there's so many I could talk about. I think this would be a good round table one. And I did watch Infinity War last night. No, coincidentally. So, but who do we start with? Well, why don't we start with the biggest one of all? And that's that purple guy. Thanos.
Grimace?
And
Grimace from McDonald?
Grimace from McDonald. Grimace, yeah. Take that, Grimace. And Thanos actually is, well, he's a bad guy. Obviously, he's a bad guy. But some of the things you talked about do strike a chord with me with Thanos, because as far as a moral compass goes, when you talked about that, he's one of those characters, and I was thinking about this as I categorize the villains, and there's some that are just bad, which we'll get to. They're just bad through and through, and that's all they want to be bad. And then there are some that are misguided. And of course, there are some that redeem themselves, which I have a couple of those too. But Thanos is one whose moral compass was interesting. Because I know in the end, I'm not a big comic book person, unlike you, Lou. I can see all the comic books behind you on your wall. But so I know that if I'm not mistaken, his original motivation, I think even back to the first Avengers film, was that he wanted to impress Death, the goddess of death, or whoever that was.
In the original Infinity Gauntlet comics, his original motive was to eliminate half the universe to impress Mistress Death.
There you go. But by the time of Infinity War, and it grew on, that at least in the universe of the movie, shifted a bit to he just wanted to eradicate half of all life in the universe. But he had a reason, and to him, in his twisted logic, his reason was a good one, and it was meant to be good in his mind, because he wanted to improve everybody's life by, matching up the limited resources with the proper population of the universe, so everybody wasn't starving, hungry, impoverished, and all that kind of stuff. Twisted, absolutely. Misguided, for sure. But it's interesting because in his mind, he was doing good, which you talked about. So again, doesn't excuse it. And I've heard many people ask the question, well, instead of eradicating half the universe, why didn't you just, double the resources? Huh. It's a good question. But
the movie would have been far less interesting.
it would have been far less interesting. But again, as I was watching Infinity War again last night, I did sort of have this in mind, and you hear him continue to talk about his plan and his belief that it's for the good of everybody in the universe. Clearly, it's twisted and messed up and all that, and he is kind of a mean guy, but it's an interesting take on the villain because he's evil through and through, but in his mind he has a good motive. Whereas it's not just I just want to be in charge of everything and it's mine. He actually had to do the work, make everybody grateful, happy, and retire and live in the rejoice of a what did he say? Of not a forgiving universe, of a
grateful universe.
Of a grateful universe.
Right. In his mind, the universe was going to thank him for what he did.
Right. So
he didn't think that people would like miss all the people who died. They were just thought, oh, everybody's gone. We have more resources. Thank you. Thanos.
Now, lest we forget,
you.
when he realized that, he said, okay, plan A isn't going to work because you all remember too much. So I'm just going to take it all down. So that was a little evil, but thankfully by then,
one thing I noticed is that when
time travel worked to our benefit.
When his motives started to turn more evil, he failed. Like when he was trying to help the universe, he succeeded. And then when he was like, oh yeah, I just want to kill the universe and make a new one, he lost.
Yeah. And I wanted, and there's so many we might talk about more, but I won't go through them. But I was thinking about in Marvel, at least, and probably across the board when you talk about Disney and Star Wars, there's so many that the villains in the Marvel universe, a lot of them did have in their mind, a moral compass that made everything right. Age of Ultron. Mm-hmm. No, Civil War, I mean. Zemo, I keep forgetting his name. The most convoluted bad guy plot of all, where he tried to get everybody back up into Siberia. And Zemo, I'm saying his name right, Zemo?
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Right. Yeah. But again, in his mind, he had a perfectly valid reason for what he was doing, and in the end was sort of sympathetic. Not really, but sort of. And I wanted to talk about Loki, but I'll save that. Because he's just so awesome anyway.
Yeah, I have a feeling I have a feeling we're going to get to him specifically.
Yeah, so I'll save that. I was just thinking, too, as far as redemptive arcs. I'm sorry, I'm taking part. See, I'm cheating. This is what we do on the show. I think we talked about the Scarlet Witch in the Heroine show, but she's a classic example. We don't remember. She was a bad guy. She was a villain / briefly when we first saw her. And then had a quick redemptive arc, and now she's the most awesome Avenger of all. But but it's interesting how, at least in Marvel, for the most part, the villains do have a lot of depth and moral turmoil going on within. They're not just I'm out to rule the world, and that's the end of it. And that's interesting, and that's probably to Nicholas's point that makes them that much more interesting because they're more. I don't want to say relatable, I guess, maybe, but you can see where they're coming from, and there's a conflict, and there's more to it than just a power grab. So.
I want to move on to another.
Wait! Oh no! Do you have any other thoughts on Thanos? Because I want to tell you, Thanos was not on my list. So Thanos was not. So
what?
And I'm going to tell you why, right? Because. For me, he almost
does this. I'm wrong.
No. And I'm going to tell you why. Because I think he's obviously one of the most evil villains because he murdered trillions, right? And it's interesting because sometimes, and Nick, this is Marvel fans will hear, especially from critics, sometimes there's complaints about some of the villains in the MCU, right? In terms of some of the flaws that maybe these villains have. Look, there is a level of sympathy for Thanos because at his core, he is initially well-intentioned. I think, and this is where one of those times that I think the actor I think Josh Brolin, behind the makeup and the CGI, I think Josh Brolin's performance brings a wonderful humanity to a character that at his core is actually, in what he's doing, incredibly evil, but there is this dichotomy to him too, because he has a very emotional side to him when it comes to Gamora, right? So it is really almost black and white. However, he's incredibly heartless when it comes to his other daughter. I mean, he literally pulls apart and rips apart his other daughter while trying to do everything he can to coddle and save Gamora. But I think, again, we go back to the levels of intentions, and I think we're going to talk about intent a lot for a lot of these characters. To use another MCU very bad villain like Killmonger, right? Killmonger from Black Panther, very well-intentioned, very well-meaning, but his execution is incredibly flawed. And I think that's the crux of Thanos. And it's funny, man, because I had this flip-flop between, do I put him number one on the list or do I leave him off the list entirely? And I left him off because I knew that one of you would mention him and I'd still get to talk about him. So
Cop out.
So, Nicholas, who is first or last on your list, and why are you putting him here? And give us your explanation.
So
of why.
Next is another MCU villain, the Vulture.
Oh, by the way, this is why he's my son.
Ooh, I love that one.
I love the Vulture so much because just like Thanos, you understand why he's doing it. Like the first scene of the movie shows him losing his job because of Tony Stark. So he was like, all right, let's make weapons out of this alien stuff we found. And he's all doing it just to support his family. Like he's doing it from a good place just for a really bad reason.
So I have to jump in because if you know me, if you've ever seen a live show of my audience, I am surrounded by Spider-Men.
I couldn't tell.
You like Spider-Man?
A little bit.
I thought you were a DC guy.
I had no idea. Wow.
I'm literally sitting in a Spider-Man chair wearing my Spider-Man underoos, but that's too much information. Adrian Toomes is, I think, one of the best overall villains in the MCU, period. No qualifier. Because, again, if you look at some of the villains, again, sometimes there have been complaints, not from me, but from others, that sometimes the talent that they bring in for the performances of the villains is sometimes too short, sometimes even wasted, and that is not true. Michael Keaton brings something to Adrian Toomes, which I think is absolutely remarkable. And, on its face, when you first meet him, it's almost this, basic sort of trope, the blue collar guy that's spurned by the super rich guy, and he's going out to sort of steal, beg, borrow, and steal to make money by shady means. And that would have been okay. But I think what makes Toomes one of the best villains are the twists. Look, I'm telling you, and if you haven't seen Spider-Man Homecoming, major spoiler alert. That scene when Peter Parker...
When the door opens.
When that door opens, nobody, I don't care who you are, nobody saw that coming. And when you see that Toomes is Liz's father, it dramatically shifts the entire tone of the movie. The stakes are automatically incredibly raised at that moment, and now all of a sudden the problems of this high school kid are exponentially greater, right? And there's a level of terror in there that's palpable, right? And that scene when they're talking in the kitchen, and then look, I think even the scene in the car on the way to the dance, and kudos to the directors,
the lighting team,
the lighting, how when you see that shift and that awakening happening for Toomes, and the light on his face from the street light goes from red to green, like I remember hitting Nicholas in the theater. But and again, all credit goes to Feige and the Marvel team for casting the perfect actor, because the way he emotes in his face is remarkable, but also there's a level of sympathetic and relatability to this character that we feel throughout the entire film. And then there's sort of this possible Robin Hood anti-hero sympathy that starts to go out the window as, he kills one of his henchmen. But I think part of the reason why I put him so high on my list is not necessarily what happens with Peter, but the fact that he spares Peter not once in the car, but twice. Because when he goes to prison and he refuses to reveal Spider-Man's real identity to the Scorpion, he shows, like, all of a sudden that his villain arc that we've invested in for however long, like, pays off. And I think that humanity and the morality and the menacing and the performance makes, without question, Adrian Toomes, the Vulture, one of, if not the very best Marvel Cinematic Universe villains, period.
Agreed.
Now, you're a little biased, but you mentioned one scene. Now, I just wanted to point out, because I always thought this was interesting, where he does kill the henchman. I thought it was even interesting because, again, and he even says throughout the movie, I'm not, like, how could you do this to Liz? I'm not doing it to her. I'm doing it for her. He keeps reminding us why he's doing all this. But even when he killed the henchman, remember, that wasn't his intention. I thought that was the
anti-gravity.
No, that's that one. Oh,
but
he didn't seem too busted up about it, but still,
right. There was no remorse afterwards, and it almost was. It gave him the ability to send a message and a lesson to everybody else who was around him that if you've even thought about crossing me, this is what I am capable of. And I think that was another turning point for his character too.
Yep.
Because it's one thing to steal, it's another thing to kill, intentional or otherwise. So, all right. So Nicholas, who is on? Oh no. So it's to me, isn't it? It's to me. So all right, if you want to stay in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, that's fine. We can sort of go, by property. We can do Marvel and then maybe Star Wars and get to Disney.
Ooh.
Look, I mean, how do we not put Loki on the list?
How do you not put Loki?
Yeah, because look, no other villain in the MCU, I think, can match the pathos of Hiddleston's Loki. He, by the way, he actually auditioned for the role of Thor, and if you go on the YouTubes, you can find test footage of him auditioning for the role of Thor, which looks very awkward. But talk about a villain that steals a movie even before it was revealed for him to be the antagonist. And the thing about Loki that's fascinating to me is how much we care about him, even when he's doing bad things, because his personal story is so tragic, right? I mean, his history and his story is tragic for a lot of reasons. And he makes these, 180-degree turns from good guy to bad guy. And it layers so much depth into his character, makes him so very interesting. It's no coincidence. That's why he's getting his own Disney Plus series. And, as the anti-hero, he's a bad guy, right? He does a lot of really bad things most of the time. He's very jealous and he's very petty. I mean, there's a childlike, stomping the ground aspect to him. But on the opposite side, like, he does come through. There is a bit of almost trustworthiness to him every so often. And I think there's obviously a level of humor to him as well. I think, the scene when he pretends to be Odin and some of the other lighthearted comedic beats that we get from Loki really makes him a likable bad guy.
I have been falling for 30 minutes.
And how in Thor Ragnarok, he literally just dumps Odin in New York and then leaves him there.
So did he do that for Odin's benefit, or did he do that to sort of try and banish him?
like, I think he didn't want to, like, completely just, like, kill him, so that he just put him in New York rather than just killing him so that he can take his place.
Right, but he didn't. That's what I'm saying. Like, he's some of his redemptive qualities are, I'm not bad enough to actually go out and by my own hand kill my father, and I also just can't banish him away. Like, I'm going to give him a life to live out. And if you look in some of the bonus features, you can see there were some deleted scenes that they filmed of Odin in New York, having interactions with both Loki as well as Thor that unfortunately, I think actually fortunately made it to the cutting room floor. I think would have been a little disjointed in terms of the flow of the movie. But that's what I mean. Like, just when you think Loki is the worst like, you're the worst brother, just when you think he's the worst brother in the world, he'll do something to be like, aw, Loki, give me a hug.
Surprise.
Lots of surprises.
You are a bad guy, but this does not.
You are.
You are
Doesn't
a
mean
bad
you're a bad
guy.
That's exactly it. Like, and I think that's what we're going to find in a lot of the people on our list. Like, there are some bad guys that we like because maybe they're not 100% bad, or maybe we have an understanding of why they are the way they are. And look, Loki had a tragic upbringing. Yes, he grew up in royalty, but when he has that awakening in terms of where he came from and why and how he is never going to be the ruler of Asgard, it is devastating to him. And all he ever wanted was the approval of his father, which I don't think he ever really got.
That's my go. I have a little clip of that on my phone. That's my go-to text answer when someone's not telling me something, is the little clip of Loki. Tell me that. That's my go-to. Loki, I'll add this. We could do a whole show on Loki, of course. We could. But I'll say this, because the arc of Loki and how he was written was amazing. But Tom Hiddleston's ability to bring that character and make, when the actor infuses enough, I was going to say humanity, he's not human, but enough of their acting ability in there that you can be sympathetic for this character or understand him, is incredible. And Tom Hiddleston is just such an amazing job. I think Tom Holland called him out, though. I think it was Tom Holland, kind of to our point, where I think it was at a con somewhere where they were doing press for one of the movies, and he Tom Hiddleston was there, and he said, I don't think there's ever been a villain anywhere more beloved than you. And he's like, oh, that's great and all that. He goes, but you do get off kind of light for the whole New York thing, Everyone kind of forgets about that. So, but the fact that Loki, the character, as written, as performed, can do what he did, but still become one of the most beloved, not just beloved villains, but most beloved characters in the whole Marvel universe. How many people went into Infinity War obsessed with, how's he going to, or went into Endgame, I should say. How's he going to come back to life? Coming up with all these theories of he was left-handed, he was this, coming any way we can have Loki come back in Endgame. I think more people are obsessed about that than how they're actually going to snap everybody back. But
right, because his death was tragic. I mean, there were like people sobbing when Loki died because, again, there was a gravitas to it. There was so much sympathy that we had for him, because I don't think you don't hate him the way you hate some of these. We're going to talk about characters and I don't use the word hate lightly. That you hate these characters.
Yeah, and you mentioned Ragnarok, Nicholas, earlier, like coming off of that, where you think his arc has come full circle, and he is honestly a good guy now. And even in Infinity War, you had a glimpse of, all right, where's he going? He's a bad guy, but in the end, you think, still never sure with him, but you think he was trying to come back on the side of right. But yeah, I remember counting the ways he could come back, and I think more people, there are a lot of people like in that opening scene, I'm out. And that was it. But
people were so desperate to get Loki back. They were like, Loki's the rat in Endgame.
Right.
yeah, I was coming up with all these. He's using the wrong hand, and he's come back before. No redemptions this time, as some big
no
mean purple
right.
guy.
No resurrections
this time. Yeah, whatever. Jerk.
So, do you have any other Tim? Do you have any other Marvel?
You know what? We should move on because we can go through every movie. I'll just add this. I think I love me some Thor movies. I'm one of those. I love A Dark World. I know it's maybe more on the bottom of critical acclaim for movies, but I know one of the reasons it does sometimes get a bad rap, and this is a perfect illustration of what we're doing. As in A Dark World, you have Malekith as a villain who is just a flat out bad entity with not a lot of depth if you're going to be critical about it. And that's a good, perfect example of what we're talking about, because you have all these villains we talked about and many more we didn't. And we care about them and we want to know what happens. And Malekith was one of those, he's just bad and he just wants to be bad. And there's really no redemptive anything to him. So I think for that reason, that's some of why Dark World maybe doesn't get held up as some of the other films does for the sake of
without a doubt. There's no.
I'm trying to be nice, but I love. Yeah,
there's no emotional. Where we have no sort of emotional investment.
No personality.
Right. Yeah.
Right.
He was. I think he's the worst, and that's when I alluded to earlier. I think he's the worst, quote unquote, Marvel villain in terms of execution. Of it in terms of just storytelling.
Yeah. So that by example of being that example of the how not to do a villain just puts more light on when you do a villain well and do it right, how powerful that is.
Without a doubt. So do we want to move from here to Star Wars? Do you guys have any Star Wars villains?
I have some.
Timmy Foster, go ahead.
I did think of this, and
I'm so, by the way, as a quick personal, I'm so curious as to who you might have on your Star Wars list.
Well, I did think of that, and I was trying to go obscure and not for the slam dunk ones. I was even thinking of Dryden Voss to bring him up from Solo, just because Paul Bettany can be a villain in one movie and be the Vision in the other franchise, and that's pretty cool. But who do we go with here? You know what? I'll just throw it out there.
Jar Jar Binks. Just get it out. Just say Jar Jar Binks is the worst Star Wars villain.
I love me some Jar Jar Binks, but I guess you have the Vader part, but that's hard. That's a hard one to do because there is a redemptive arc to that whole story, which we all know. The Emperor is the true evil here. I'm just going to we'll start with that, and we'll dig a little deeper as we go through. But if nobody says the Emperor, that's kind of a bad oversight. So let's see, I took Thanos and the Emperor, so I'm just going right for the top every time. But as opposed to Anakin / Darth Vader and a lot of the villains we talked about, there's no arc to this guy. In fact, which I'm not saying it's a bad thing, but he's just evil. He doesn't have well, I don't know. Like in his mind, I guess he thinks he is outwardly says, I'm bringing peace to the galaxy. That's what he states as his ultimate plan. Like once we do this, there will be peace. Now, peace in his mind is everybody does what I tell them and shuts up. So that's kind of mean, but he's just an evil guy. But then I guess we reassessed it a little bit when we saw him in Rise of Skywalker and how we all felt about that. And I'm still fuzzy on how he came back don't send me to a book to read it because I don't read the books.
No explanation.
But, so there's a whole further continuation of his arc, which just makes him even eviler than he was before. But I guess there's an example of a villain that's not just evil and wants to do evil things, but has the power to manipulate every little thing to his end. And that's a really nasty thing to do. So He's just a jerk. Even when he was Palpatine in A Phantom Menace, I thought he was a jerk.
Well, but when he see
even though we didn't know, we didn't quote unquote know then, but
right.
I remember,
but as Palpatine, he almost lures you, and we're going to touch on this later. He almost lures you into believing that he is, a public servant that's well intentioned and compassionate and trying to do the right thing, and not that he's a psychopathic murderer who his only thing he wants to do is just literally rule the entire galaxy.
Well, I remember when Phantom Menace came out, and I love that movie, by the way. I'm just going to be on record saying that, because that was my daughter's Star Wars. That's when it came out. We saw it 7 times in the theater. We cried when Qui-Gon died and all that. But I remember when it came out, now if you were a diehard fan, you probably picked up on it real quick. But that was an unknown for those of us who don't remember when it was actually released, and we hadn't seen Attack of the Clones. None of that was out yet. And there was a lot of speculation, honest to goodness, was thrown out there. Wait, is Palpatine, is he the Emperor? That wasn't really known yet. So, and within the Phantom Menace confines, he was a good guy, I guess. He was on that side. Now, in retrospect, you look back and, well, how could we miss that? That was clearly obvious from the get-go. But let's not forget, it really wasn't when the film came out. And there were a lot of people. If you were a casual fan, you certainly didn't know yet. And you just thought, well, that's a nice guy. But, the clues were there as you look at it. But yeah, when he started, it seemed like he was our favorite public servant. He just wanted the good for everybody. And, we will have peace, 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 peace. Now we know better. But
And I think that's one of the qualities about Palpatine. He is incredibly cunning. One of the most successful villains in being able to actually execute on what he did. He was, if you think about it, in the films, his rule was only like 25 years or so, right? So he was patient. He was very intelligent, incredibly manipulative, but almost so evil that he has no problem not just killing, planetfuls of people, but even going against the people who were at one point his allies, whether it's Dooku or Gunray or whoever. He has no problem taking anybody out who is in his way. And I think on a micro and a macro level, his ability to turn things and turn people. Look, he turned Anakin very quickly against the Jedi. He turned the Galactic Republic into an empire. So when you talk about his powers, it's not just his Force lightning powers, but it's his powers in terms of leadership and being deceptive and influencing, other people individually and collectively.
Palpatine orchestrated the entire Clone Wars just so that he can get power from everywhere.
And that's all he wanted. Like there was no well intention. Like he's
a good villain because of how evil he is. Not because he's relatable, not because of that, just because he's evil.
And there's no redemptive quality to him at all. He would have done anything to gain that power to become, immortal, with no reservation, like at all.
He's a jerk. but how he could manipulate people, that was, like you said, his actual abilities aside, his main great ability was just being able to manipulate everybody that he needed to manipulate to do exactly what he wanted, even to the point where, whether it was his own device or Sith powers, like everything, you could tell he was thinking not just one step ahead, 2 steps ahead. He's thinking like 25 steps ahead, and how everything's orchestrated, how you manipulate young, bright-eyed little Anakin Skywalker. I mean, you can't ask somebody if they're an angel and have evil in your heart. You're not evil, but he found it. And and again, manipulated everybody to their end, even to the point, like being an admiral on an Imperial cruiser. I don't know why anybody would want that job, because you're probably going to get killed. Like why anybody would want to be his Sith apprentice when, you kind of know what happens. But I guess when you're in that line of work, that's a, casualty of the job or a risk of the job. So.
Right. Because and he killed people both at his own hand, including his own master, as well as other people through, having some of the people around him just, following orders. The Jedi were killed, not his blood. The blood is on his hands, not physically, but it was his Order 66 that eliminated all the Jedi.
Yeah.
All right, so are we going to move on to our next villain?
Are you staying in the Star Wars universe?
Yes.
Bring it on, brother.
Excellent.
This may be a little bit of an obscure choice, and I don't know if you guys would be able to comment, but one of my favorite Star Wars villains is Darth Maul from the Clone Wars. He is just so evil. Like, he has no redemptive qualities. Like, all these things. His entire story arc is driven on revenge. Nothing else. He just wants to get revenge on Obi-Wan and just wants to be like one guy who's ruling everything.
So, Nick, just quickly explain, because for those people that saw Darth Maul get cut in half and fall down a shaft in the films, he does come back in Clone Wars, and he's slightly different than what we saw in the films, correct?
I'm one of those people. I have no idea what happened to him because I didn't see
He's very different in the Clone Wars. Like, when you first see him, he's like insane, and the only way he survived getting chopped in half is because all he did was think about revenge. All he wanted to do was to get revenge on Obi-Wan Kenobi. So him and his brother, spoilers, meet up, and then they go and face him. And then in the Clone Wars, one of his big things is just chasing Obi-Wan around, trying to kill him and get revenge.
Right, which is obviously an inherent quality for a lot of villains. But like you said, he had no delusions of grandeur. He did not want to be emperor. He was not trying to be, anything else other than getting revenge on the people that put him in that situation.
In the last few episodes on Mandalore, like, he does everything he does because he's trying to lure Obi-Wan to Mandalore to face him, but Ahsoka shows up, and then all these things ensue. I won't spoil it because it's the best arc and one of the best Star Wars stories ever.
So I did not have Darth Maul on my list because I felt that he lacked some of the qualities that made him a good villain. Great, the guy's great with a lightsaber. He's not really a talkative guy, but
he doesn't have a lot to say.
Doesn't have a lot to contribute to the conversation. He's awful at parties, by the way. Snoke was not on my list. No backstory. I think they failed in terms of taking advantage of that character. He's a weak imitation of Palpatine, who does not get a lot of screen time.
That's why he gets chopped in half.
The character that I put on my list, and yes, we're going to talk about Darth Vader, obviously, but one of the characters that I put on my list is one that might not necessarily come to mind because he does not wield a lightsaber. He never grabs a blaster. He doesn't, by his physical hand, have the blood of anybody on him, although he has the blood of many.
Jar Jar Binks.
It is not Jar Jar Binks. And again, this is where the casting made this character exceptional. And if you know, Grand Moff Tarkin is, I think, one of the most threatening characters. And if you think about it, right, he has no force powers at all, but he is a vicious tyrant, right? But think about this, right? Think about his interactions with Vader in Star Wars, right? When Vader is near Tarkin, he's much more of almost a background character, right? He's so much more like less violent and aggressive. And talk about like being able to command respect. He is the one who's able to tell Vader to stop doing what he's doing, and Vader follows his orders without any question or hesitation. So if you want to talk about somebody that has true power without having any sort of force abilities or quote-unquote weapons in his hand, I think Grand Moff Tarkin absolutely qualifies for that. He's also completely ruthless, completely emotionless when he decides to blow up an entire planet after lying to Princess Leia. So I think for those reasons, we did get to see him again in later films, but I'm even just talking about him in that very first movie. And Peter Cushing, again, like, not a ton of screen time, which, by the way, do you know that he wore slippers the entire time he was on screen and on set? I'm not kidding. There you go. Useless trivia. But Grand Moff Tarkin, I think, is an evil Star Wars villain that demands to be on this list. And so I have to ask, is Darth Vader, was he on your lists?
No.
Interesting. It's interesting because I think for a lot of people, and by the way, for those of you driving, please do not keep your eyes on the road and hands on the wheel, because look, for a lot of people and a lot of polls, Darth Vader is the greatest movie villain ever to a lot of people, hands down. Like, Darth Vader beats every other baddies for a lot of different reasons. And look, that first time you see him in Episode 4, when he comes out with this towering black silhouetted frame and that face mask and that helmet that he has, and that deep, ominous, that grim tone, again, casting of James Earl Jones, all that combined with his qualities as a leader, as a fighter, right? In terms of commanding an army, wielding a lightsaber. He's one of the best TIE fighter or pilots anywhere in the galaxy. He's pretty good with that whole force thing. But again,
a little bit.
Like, what makes him such a great villain is the pathos, right? That use of emotion, that sadness that we are able to start feeling for a character that we were scared. I mean, look, Vader was a scary character. That first time he was on scene, he was so imposing and intimidating, which is part of the reason why we loved him so much. And then all of a sudden, we start feeling sadness and sympathy for him as he starts to go into this descent from hero to villain, back to hero again. Like, that's an incredible character arc, not just in Star Wars, but I think anywhere in really movie history. There's a very Shakespearean quality to Darth Vader and his journey. And look, even just Star Wars in general. I mean, look, a lot of Star Wars was built on the teachings of Joseph Campbell, right? Who really helped us understand storytelling and how it's intertwined with our lives. And he helped us sort of identify a lot of what these themes and archetypes are in The Hero with 1,000 Faces. And we understand from him what this hero's journey is and the transformation and the adventure that happens in all of the frameworks of stories, really, I think, throughout any culture. And George Lucas was a huge admirer of Campbell's work and admitted using them as a direct reference to influence Star Wars. Lucas actually got to meet him, but not until after the original trilogy was created. But I think, that's part of what makes Star Wars and these characters stand the test of time and just sort of part of pop, forget just pop culture, just sort of the zeitgeist, because it has all those elements of, the princess and the rogue hero and, the evil villain that's dressed in black. And you can't have that hero's journey without a really good villain. It's how we started talking about this. And that's exactly what Star Wars delivers with Vader.
Well, I did have Vader on my list. It was hard. One, it seemed obvious. But two, the thing with Darth Vader, which does make him an incredible character, is the arc we saw, which, and I guess when you evaluate, he started good, had a little venture into that dark side thing, but then came back to the light. But yeah, his arc is legendary. Like, nobody doesn't know about it. Actually, I take that back, because I'm going to have a little story about that. But I guess I didn't really say it because there's so many more we do that we all don't know about already. So I just.
But how do we almost? That's what I mean. Like, how can you not?
How can you not? Yeah, it's kind of like you have to have.
Like, he without hesitation killed younglings.
Yeah, he gets off kind of lightly for that.
Yeah,
Loki got off for New York, and
we think about sort of the grand, blowing up planets and shooting people and spaceships, crashing. We don't think about the people on there. But when he stands towering over a group of kids with his lightsaber drawn,
out his lightsaber.
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't get much worse than that.
And I think one of the best Star Wars scenes is the recreation of that first scene with Vader against the rebels at the end of Rogue One. Just because it just shows him wiping the floor with all of them, and he's merciless. He's just like taking out his lightsaber, killing this one guy, throwing this other guy around, and it's just the thing that I can describe with Vader is intimidation.
Yeah. From the second you see him, he's an intimidating. Now, granted, I think that the Hayden Christian Anakin years, it took a little bit of that intimidation away. He was a bit of a whiner. I'm not crazy about the Hayden Christensen years. I'm not crazy about Jake Lloyd either, but he's a kid, so I can't get too mad at him. Yippee, whatever. How one word can ruin a scene. But that's not Jake Lloyd's fault. But it did. I think for me, that took away some of that intimidation factor, seeing it like that. But it is part of his journey. Like, again, it's sort of that, that up and down roller coaster journey that we have with Vader.
One thing, like, when I see him now, I was like, oh, that was Hayden Christensen, Anakin Skywalker.
No, when I see him, he is going to be that ominous figure in the first 5 minutes of episode 4.
I think that's that's why maybe not you, but we struggled with this one a little bit, because episode 4, 5, and 6. Now, to me and you, that was episode 1, 2, 3. We weren't doing episodes back then. That was the first time we saw him. And at that point, you didn't know the backstory. There was one, but you didn't know it yet. So he was very evil. And absolutely during that time, I was afraid of him. He was a classic bad guy. But maybe that's a little bit, because now we see the first 3 films and everything else. So now you see the whole arc, and maybe tarnished isn't really the right word, but you know what I'm trying to say. Like, right. Now so it's not just this guy's evil and blah blah blah. And yes, he did redeem himself in Luke's eyes. I still don't get over that you killed a lot of kids, but hey, that's cool, But even then, it was still, suit Darth Vader. He took his mask off and put that back on. But once you saw the so much set up for who he was and all that, and I kind of wish, George Lucas, I love you. So take the, but you do wish his backstory maybe was more tragic, and there was a clearer path to how he got to where he was. Because the path you saw, you could really, that's all it took to get you to, on one hand, be a good kid and firmly on the good guy's side, to being the most evil thing in the world was just,
Right, but even how he got that, right? So when you see...
There could be a lot... If there's a more tragedy in his backstory and you felt it more, then maybe even today you take that whole arc maybe more to heart, and you still think, I guess the early years maybe put a little tarnish on that, because, for well documented, we know a lot of people feel about the prequels and stuff. You kind of said it yourself there, Lou, but
I mean, even the way he got to that point, Tim, even the way he got that damage on his face and he lost his legs, there was so little sympathy there for him. Like, Obi-Wan tried to help him. He tried to warn him. He tried to save him and say, look, I've got the high ground. Like, this is your moment to be redeemed. And his arrogance in himself, like he became, you hate him as a villain, but you just dislike him as a person.
Yeah.
It's over, Anakin.
Yeah, so who knows? Well said. That reminds me, though, this is a total aside, add a little levity to the conversation, because you're bringing us all down here, talking about evil people. But the notion of faceless people being eradicated by a blast from the Death Star, or a well-placed proton torpedo by one Luke Skywalker. There were people with families on that Death Star. They're scrubbing the floor. They just wanted a job, I was watching A New Hope again for the 212th time. I was struck, and this never struck me before, but I was struck by the line when they make it back to the Rebel base, and you see Leia and the Rebel, whoever that is, comes out. You're safe. When we heard about Alderaan, we feared the worst. And I actually couldn't help but thinking, isn't the worst that millions of people just died? Or no, is the worst that one person's okay? You're okay. So it's all good. Let's go get him. I just thought that was funny.
When you said that reminded me, I think one of the best, very quick aside, one of the best scenes in a Marvel movie that involves a villain is Iron Man 3. When Iron Man is about to smoke the guy in the mansion, and he goes, seriously, I don't even like working here. They are so weird.
Yes.
Like, he instantly gets redeemed, and Tony Stark lets him go.
That's funny. Yeah, I like that one. Good thing he wasn't quick on the trigger.
Exactly. So, all right. So it's proof that Tony Stark has a heart. Okay. So I think are we done with Marvel? Done with Star Wars? Let's
this is about Disney proper.
We're all family here. So, all right. So Tim, bring us to your Disney, and I included animation and live action in this list. So you go wherever, your Wikipedia takes you.
Well, I'm diving in the Pixar pool, and this was just me trying to, not an obvious go-to one, but I think it's a very underrated villain for a lot of reasons. Has a lot more depth than people realize, maybe. And that's Syndrome from The Incredibles.
Interesting.
And I think for a lot of people, might not when you talk about great villains in Disney history, Syndrome might not pop up at the top of the list, because as we'll talk about, I'm sure, there are so many great villains just within the Disney universe, not even counting Marvel and Star Wars. And most people might not think there's a lot to this character because it's Pixar. It's it's lighthearted. It's fun. But if you think about Syndrome, he does have, it's questionable, but he does have motivation. And he's one of these characters, his motivation, he knows, becomes evil. But it was born out of, he just wanted to belong. He just wanted to be Incrediboy. And his path to the dark side was born out of rejection and your hero looking at you and saying, get out of here, kid, basically. Shattering your dreams, shattering your visions of yourself, your self-esteem, your ego, and all that. And I think the thing about this, and I was trying to think of other examples of this because I'm sure there are some, one of his prime motivations was to make it that nobody would be special. If I can't be special, if you can't be special, everybody's going to be special.
Everybody's super, no one can be.
Then no one can be, right? I think I was trying to think of other villains that have sort of that same motivation. I'm sure they're out there. But he also struck me as one, which I'm sure we'll talk about. We'll get some fun with this. It's a good Marvel question, too. To think about a villain like Spider-Man, Vulture. Like, they innately don't have a super power or super ability to unleash upon the world, like, Thanos or somebody, or the Emperor. But their ability is their smarts and their intelligence, but they're not special in any regard. They're not Mr. Incredible with super strength or Elastigirl with his ability to do stretching, or as we've seen with all the superheroes in the Incredibles universe, they have some ability, some supernatural, enhanced, to use Captain America's terminology. He just used his smarts to create this evil persona, which was very evil. And he had all these great toys, but again, spoke to his point of, I can make myself special and I can make everybody else special, ergo no one's special and all that. So it's just interesting because it's a character you might not take seriously right away, or might not think about right away when you think of villains. But if you look, there is a lot of depth there and a lot of motivation behind him, which has a lot of broader questions you ask, about, what makes you not good or evil, but what makes you special, and what are these, powers about? So I thought he was a fun
I think
one
that's
to throw on.
That's a fascinating pull, Tim. And I didn't even think about Syndrome at all. But as you say it, and as you start, and maybe the reason why I didn't think about him is because there's a level of sympathy that I have for Syndrome, because I don't think a lot of what I think that there are clear, psychopathic and sociopathic mental problems that he has. And I'm not saying that as a joke, because clearly he was this very smart, didactic, scientific kid who just wanted to belong. And what happened just sort of set him off. And if you think about him and even the way he does things and reacts to things, like there's a level of, sadism to him, but there's also this weird calmness to him. So if you think about when Mr. Incredible destroys like his 9th, 10th Omnidroid, whatever it is, he doesn't freak out. Like, he's totally chill. He's like, that's impressive. Like, that was almost scarier than him just losing his marbles. Yeah. So there is something that is very intelligent about him, but there's something very scary. And because he seems to have sort of a complete lack of a moral compass at all, other than when he spared the life of poor little Jack's baby sister Carrie, and not kill her when he went to go get the baby. Which again, he had no problem going to kidnap a baby and put it in harm's way.
Well, I see he's a nice kid, but I think his arc maybe more would be one. And talking about Darth Vader and wishing, or I wish, maybe now that we were told his arc and how he got to where he was, maybe do you buy it? Do you not buy it? If it were more tragic, you could understand it, then yeah. But if you look at Syndrome, you see how it's a good arc of seeing how somebody breaks. Mm-hmm. I guess you see how he broke. And like you said, he probably, it seems like he had issues, if you want to put it that way, before then, so his journey to being Syndrome and evil was a little less, but you could see how he just absolutely broke and became this person. And in Syndrome's case, I buy it. I didn't question. I don't know if I go all the way there, but but you buy it. And again, it's how they wrote it, how the treatment is. And again, it's more of a lighthearted take on a villain and superheroes, obviously, for being the Pixar film. But like many, if not all, Pixar films especially, much more than meets the eye when you start digging a little bit under the surface of the story. So, and that's a great example of it, and one I think which was a lot of people might not look at right away.
Yeah, because
you look at other films where they do, but this one there is a lot of stuff going on.
Yeah, because you think about him as sort of, because my son and I, we go to comic book conventions all the time, and you get to go and that's where you have and he's almost like the disappointed kid at the comic book convention after meeting the person who was his hero, that you have in your mind's eye the way he's going to be in real life. Like, you idolize these people. And yes, most of the people who maybe get disappointed by the person being in real life not being the person that's on screen. Maybe you don't turn into a, megalomaniacal villain, but there is that sense of disappointment and sadness when you hear or see that they do something that is not what you had or you had always want him to be. But yeah, I mean, again, I think that there's some mental problems that he may have, and I don't use that in a mocking kind of way. Like I have sympathy for him in that way, but otherwise he is a completely sympathetic free character for the most part.
Yeah.
So, Nicholas, what are you, who's the first one on your Disney/Pixar film list?
One that I put on my list is Hades.
Yeah.
From Hercules. He is such a good villain because he's super evil. Like, there's nothing you can really relate to for him. He's very fun and funny, which I can always look for. Like, I want to enjoy watching a villain. And he's just a really good villain, all in all.
So, was Hades on your list at all, Tim?
In an honorable mention kind of way, but no, like if I ever do a roundup of my 10 favorite villains or within Disney, oh yeah, he's on that list. You can't get much more evil than being Lord of the Underworld or whatever his role is. That's your job. So of course you're evil. But he does, he's evil to the core. His performance, James Woods.
Yeah.
Right. Fantastic. I would probably guess if he certainly ranks up there among the great Disney villains. I remember we were at the Villains After Hours party back in February. He was the center of attention. It was based around him. So, you had others who I'm sure will come up on this list on stage too, but they were all in his service trying to figure out what to do. So he's got some villainous chops in the Disney universe. I don't know if because Hercules being well regarded, but not up there in the top, 3 Disney movies of all time, maybe a casual fan might overlook him right away. But as opposed to some other villains we're sure to get to on this list. But oh yeah, he's a bad guy.
I wanted to put him on my list, and he was there really as an honorable mention. And the reason why is for a lot of the reasons that you said. I think he is this incredible Machiavellian, manipulative, evil character, but he's almost too funny and too lovable, and that credit goes to the writing, the direction, and certainly James Woods' portrayal of him. Again, there's no sympathy for him that I feel. I think he's a little more funny than he is ever evil. Menacing, right? I mean, he's the Lord of the Underworld, and I'm not scared by him, which is, it's a Disney movie. You're not necessarily supposed to be. But I wanted to put him on it because Hades he doesn't just steal the scenes. I mean, he steals the movie, really. And I think that's why, to your point, the villains parades and villains, after hours events at Walt Disney World, Hades is such a popular character. There's something that sarcasm and the sass, and he's a great antagonist, but he's not a super scary villain. So he made the list because I felt bad leaving him off, and again also due in part because of the portrayal by James Woods. But I don't think he rises by my definition. Again, it goes back to how we define good, bad, what is the best or worst villain. He didn't necessarily make my list, and I will explain why as I go through my list later on. But
I will say, like, one thing for Hades that would set him apart on this list or put him in a category, because we've been talking about villains that have a lot of emotional depth and great arcs. Hades doesn't have an arc. He was Lord of the Underworld. That's all. That's his job. So he became evil from being in a good place and what happened to you and all that. So from that point of view, he's in a different category than these other villains, but he's also in another category because there may be some other. In fact, I know there's one because I have him on my list, but a lot of the other villains don't come or be portrayed with a sense of humor, and he's got, like you said, because of his performance and the writing and so forth, there's an element of humor to the character. So, and that sets him apart from, I remember Emperor Palpatine telling Vader a good dad joke every once in a while. So, a lot of these characters there's not a humorous part to them, even in Marvel, Loki aside, but we were talking about Thanos and some of the more evil ones. There's a lot of how they interweaved humor into the Marvel movies, especially later on. But even the bad guys were still bad guys for the most part. But Hades does have that. And I think that's why at the parties, he's so great too, because what he does, there's an element of humor to what he's doing, and there's a joke and, all that. So.
Yeah. All right, Nicholas, who is next on your list?
You want to talk about...
Wait,
it's your turn.
Oh, it's my turn. Oh,
it's your turn.
Okay. I say I lose track. I get so
You
excited.
keep skipping yourself.
I'm going to save my ultimate villain for last in hopes that none of you steal him. Nicholas, I think you know who we've talked about this offline so don't steal him because I'm going to save him or her for later. So there are, like you, Tim, I almost wanted to go to a little bit more obscura, and there's some that I'm going to save for that. But I think, look, there's no way that any of us can leave Scar off the list. Well, I guess,
good job. That's a great one.
Well, no, I mean, that's what I mean. Like, it's one of us had to mention it, right? So again, that's why this is more conversational than us just sort of going through our list. And we know the story. We know what he does. We know the feelings that he has of resentment and this quest for power, for, ownership of the throne. I mean, he's, he murders Mufasa. He banishes Simba. He destroys the land. I mean, there's, again, so many Shakespearean elements here, from Hamlet and Claudius. And I even think that Scar is more ruthless than his Hamlet counterpart of Claudius, because he is so just beginning to end evil.
He tries to murder Simba. He murders his brother. He destroys the land just so that he can rule.
Yeah. I mean, and again, I think there's elements of Iago, not from Aladdin, but from Othello in this character too, because he doesn't necessarily, he doesn't, despite doing those things, he does not, immediately face Simba head on. He does a lot of things to sort of plant seeds and let them sort of grow over time. Again, much like Iago sort of being passed over for lieutenant, the same way that Scar has those same type of feelings about his rightful place on the throne. Once again, Scar is not Scar without Jeremy Irons. And we haven't even talked about this too, but villains that have really good theme songs and performances, Be Prepared, is
one of the best villain songs.
And it's not only one of the best songs, but there are, if you watch it again very closely, you will see a lot of, World War II era propaganda type images in there that really sort of bring a level of gravitas and fear to this animal character and a humanizing of that character and an understanding of really what he is doing to who are now his people and what he is doing to the land that he so desperately wanted to rule and, ideally was supposed to protect.
Scar's a bad guy.
I'm quoting Shakespeare and you give me Scar as a bad guy.
Scar beeth the baddest villainess of whatever.
Thank you. That's perfect. So, was he on your list, or do you think he certainly...
Absolutely was on my list. That's why I went, where you took him from.
Yeah, and I think for some people, Scar could easily rise to he could rise to very, very close to the top of people's lists as well.
I think I actually, if I ordered my list, he was number one. In fact, I'm not even going to say I think. He is number one. Because he's just evil. He's one of the, I think one of the great things about him too is, as we're talking about, we move from Marvel to Star Wars to Pixar, and I guess we're in Disney Renaissance territory. So many great villains came out of that era, and he was one of the first, not the first, but one of the first. And I know, like for me, I can relate to it on the level of that was the first real movie that we took our daughter to see. And how scared she was of this character. You know, that gives you, we talk so much about seeing Disney through your child's eyes. And this is a case where you can see, I could see her reaction to Scar and Mufasa dying and everything else from her point of view. And it just made it that much more tragic. Not that it needed more, because it was extraordinary. Well done. Jeremy Irons is amazing. The song is amazing. Like you said, everything about it was so perfect, but to see that through your child's eyes, to grow up with it and realize he was one of the first characters in the Disney Renaissance again, which led to so many great villains. For me, though, I will say Scar's most horrific thing that he ever did, and what will forever cement him as the worst villain in Disney history, was preventing Zazu from completing his rendition of It's a Small World. That is a crime. That is a true crime against all that is good in the universe. You for that alone, I don't care about the Stampede. I don't care about what you did to the Pride Lands. They had it coming, but you don't stop someone from singing that song. I'm sorry. That's just me. So.
You talk about taking your kids, and if you think about it, that murder of Mufasa, and it's nothing short of a murder, is incredibly traumatic, right? Think about watching. Go to any show at Walt Disney World or World of Color in Disneyland where they show that scene, and you know what's coming, and you can't help but cry a little bit when you see Mufasa's death and the cold eyes that Scar has. And I think that's why
no remorse. When
Scar dies, I don't think anybody feels any sort of sadness for him. Like his death was one that was very well deserved. And you don't like saying that, but it's true because of just how bad he was and the way that he did things.
Well, I think we all have those Disney moments growing up where there was that one movie that got you. Like for Bedknobs and Broomsticks made me cry. I still don't really know why to this day, but it did. But for us, it took us 3 or 4 times for our daughter to be able to sit through that scene. Honestly, we left the movie like 3 times because that's how, well, not jokingly, that's how powerful it was. And especially to 5 or 6 year old, however old she was, that's how powerful it was. And then once we got through that, but then that's how powerful a villain Scar was, because terrified her. And seeing it through your kid's eyes, and that's a horrible. That's one of the most worst scenes in all of Disneydom, which I know from a parent point of view now. It's like you said, pretty bad. And I was cheering him on when he got in the end. Serves you right, you jerk. But that's why he's up there as one of the best, if not the
worst. He's the best of the worst. The best of the worst.
Yeah, best of the worst. Yeah.
All right. So who's next on your list? Who's next on your list? Tim.
Me? Let's see. You know what? How about for the sake of we have to mention them, and I'm going to go out on a limb and say I don't think either one of you had either. I'm going to do a 2-for-1 here because I don't think they're on your list. If they were, please stop me. But let's go back to classic Disney, because I don't think any discussion of Disney villains is not complete. Let's talk about Maleficent. Mm-hmm. And I will throw in there the unnamed, the evil queen from Snow White, the original villain. And, again, I bring them up because you have to bring them up. They're legendary. Maleficent has obviously gone through a lot. I think Maleficent, it's safe to say, is the most popular Disney villain of all time. However you want to rank such things. Popularity, longevity, and just how she keeps coming back and back and back through, the original films and the remakes, the Maleficent dragon in on parade, which is one of the most incredible parade floats I've ever seen, the steampunk fire-breathing dragon. But the fact that character in dragon form can come back today and still be incredibly, incredibly popular is just a testament to the powerfulness of that character. But interesting how she gets a sympathetic arc in later portrayals from Angelina Jolie in the live action films. I admit I didn't see the second one, so it could have all gone out the window in the second one. But I remember seeing the first one and how it was such an interesting take on the character, and you saw her in a different light. But again, here's a character that has so much depth, especially when you got to see it in Maleficent, that arc of how she became the Maleficent we all know and loathed in the original Sleeping Beauty and so forth. And then the evil queen, just because she was the original, and my best memory anecdote of the evil queen would be the very appropriately named Snow White's Scary Adventures attraction. And it was that one attraction had the distinction of, for all the world looking like any other Fantasyland dark ride, it's fun, it's for kids and all that. For a lot of people, my family included, that was one of the most scariest attractions they'd ever been on. Forget Tower of Terror, forget, Expedition Everest. This scared the life out of many kids and many parents because of that one scene where the queen turns and is the witch. And I guess on a deeper level, that's kind of most your inner fear of a lot of people, like seeing that evil side literally come to life and
ride that ride. I was so scared of it.
There, you see, like my daughter would. I think she took it in stride. I wrote it all the time, but I liked Extraterrestrial Alien Encounter, and I badly mungled that pronunciation, but I loved it. But it was a scary ride because that very first Disney villain was one of the scariest of all.
So, Maleficent she's on my list, but really as an honorable mention.
Oh dear.
Well, because while obviously she has incredible powers as a sorceress, the dragon is a beautiful villain. She's the movie should just be called The Grudge, because that's really what it was. She was just mad that she didn't get to go to the christening. Listen, I've been to enough christenings in my life to know it's okay if you miss one. Like, chances are it's just being catered. It's not that good. But, I mean, that's really where her motivation comes from. Look, as somebody who was never invited to parties growing up, I never wanted to take the life of anyone, let alone wait and plot 16 years to do so and hunt people down and turn into fire-breathing dragons. So, yes, we understand from the live action that she's a little bit misunderstood. Clearly, she's got some deep-seated, issues in terms of friendships and relationships and things like that. I love the portrayal of her. I love the character, but I think because of the motivations, and which brings zero sympathy for me. Like, okay, so you didn't go to a party. You're overreacting. Just a
ruthless.
Tim, I never got invited to a party. Like, I can tell stories about grammar school, high school, college, law school, till adulthood. It's all pretty much the same. And I think that's maybe why, like, her motivation is not this grandiose taking over the world. It's not revenge on somebody. she's mad that she didn't get invited to a party. And obviously I know that it's much deeper than that, and I'm making somewhat light of it. But yeah, so that's why Maleficent, while I love the character, I don't think she is a top Disney villain. Was she on, Nicholas, was she on your list? No?
She was not on my list.
All right. So
can I say Jafar, or do you guys want to say?
Well, I mean, one of us is going to say it. So, but Nicholas, who's next on your
list? But remember, the evil queen's motivation
Jafar.
was I'm not as pretty. So, take that.
So is Jafar on your list, Nicholas?
I was just trying to do things. I was trying to do things that I knew other people were not going to say.
All right,
and
so
I knew that you guys were going to.
Yeah. So Jafar's on my list. So Nicholas, go with yours, and then we'll talk about Jafar.
Jafar is.
Who's on your list next?
I was waiting. Like my next one on my list is like the big one, and I want to wait till last.
Oh, but is it the same as mine?
Yeah.
I'm not sure if I'm happy or mad. All right, so let's talk about Jafar.
Let's talk about Jafar.
Let's talk about Jafar. Again, he is a psychopath with no morals, right? He has no feelings of remorse. He is consistently evil from the first time we meet him to the end, and the things that he does to move that evil intent going forward, like tricking Jasmine into being, I don't want to even call her his queen, to being his slave, for lack of a better word, so that he can kill her and take the throne, which is really what his intention is. He has incredible malfeasance to everyone that he meets, right? He has sort of that, atypical, what is the villain motivation? He just wants to be powerful and is willing to compromise anyone and everyone to try and achieve that. I think from a design point of view, he's a beautiful looking villain. And if you watch Aladdin very closely, the use of color in that film is incredibly telling, because when Jafar enters the room where there's a scene, everything is all red, and when everything else is going on, it's much more muted blues and earth tones and things like that. He is a manipulator. He doesn't care whose lives he puts on the line for really what just amounts to
ruling.
It's political opportunism, right? And so it's about, for him, it's political motivation and incredible ego. But despite that, I mean, he's a worthy adversary for Aladdin and Genie and whatnot. So I think he's another one of these, like Scar, that sort of has to be on the list, because he does tick a lot of the requisite boxes for what a true evil villain has to be.
I'm wondering, what we talked in the beginning, you asked how we ranked our villains, like what criteria were used. And this actually brings up, if you were to pick a villain, and we might have just done so, because we talked about villains where you could see their character arc, you could see the tragedy that happened early that turned them into the villains that they are today. And sometimes it gives you a little sympathy for them. And if you're ranking the villains based on the depth of their characters and their story arcs, you go that route. But if you were to rank a villain just purely on how villainy they are and how evil in their heart, and they have no redeeming qualities at all, there's no sympathy for them. But that probably makes you the most evilest, scariest thing of all, because you can't explain why you're so evil. I guess when you can explain why somebody's evil, the character's evil, and you can see their backstory and you get some sympathy, it takes a little bit of the evilness away, as it were. You can relate to him on some level. But when you just can't relate to this villain on any level because they are just so far gone over the top evil, that's a good way to rank an evil villain.
Yeah.
I don't know if maybe Jafar, Scar too, they both fall in that category. There's no arc or reason why they got to where they are. Scar maybe a little of the overlooked bit, from Mufasa being king, him not, but maybe. I'll grant him that little bit, but that they're just evil,
Right, and his
the emperor,
power, right,
just
and
evil.
his power, and his power sort of comes from whatever sort of mystical powers from the staff, and obviously the lamp. He does have a great sidekick though too, so you got to give him some credit for
greatest
sidekick
villain
points.
sidekicks. There you go.
That's a separate show altogether.
Top 10 best sidekicks.
All right, so Tim, who else do you have on
this
your
was
list?
mine. Oh, wow.
Because that was sort of like a group. That was a group effort
Yeah.
right there.
I'm gonna end. Now I'm gonna have to. Well, I loved Zurg, and I wanted to talk about Emperor Zurg, but that's like Darth Vader light, so we don't have to do that. I really just wanted to bring this up because I wanted. You'll know why. Wreck-It Ralph. You know what? Wreck-It Ralph, when you were talking about him, you kind of have to wonder, because Ralph's a bad guy, but he's the good guy, but he's the bad guy. So he's interesting. He's not a villain. The true villain, though, King Candy. And I really only bring that up because I want to hear you do your best King Candy, which is amazing. That's the only reason I bring it up.
So let me ask you, because is he the last one on your list?
Yeah, I was kind of into honorable mention territory with a lot.
Because
of
I think
these.
there
are so many. But,
and Tim, you, Nicholas, you just have the one last one on your list, which I know who that is. I want to save it for last, but I'm really happy that you brought up King Candy here because I want to sort of just take a quick, side track and talk about how the Disney villains have changed a little bit over the years, right? So if you look in terms of the recent departures from a lot of the traditional sort of musical format of films, right? Think about recent films, Big Hero 6 and Zootopia, but yes, we've got Frozen and Moana, but the villains there are a little bit non-traditional, right? So if you think about those films, there's non-traditional villains. And you mentioned Wreck-It Ralph. When you start looking at Ralph Breaks the Internet, there really is almost no villain at all, right? Vanellope's sort of monomythic journey, is really about her personal journey. There's no, Virus Ralph isn't really sort of a villain. But what King Candy is, and at some point it's just he's going to come out, and I'm going to do my stupid voice because I love him so much.
What I'm counting on.
But what he represents is something that I think was sort of introduced. You can almost point to Toy Story, some of the early Toy Story films, and what we're really looking at are the surprise villains,
twist
right?
villains,
right? The twist villains. So if you and we can almost call it like a bait and switch, right? So if you go back to the early films, so even like Toy Story 2, for example, for most of the movie, we're pretty much convinced that the villain is Al, right? The evil toy collector that's trying to buy them and sell them to the Japanese museum. And then all of a sudden in the third act, we have this surprise character. Stinky Pete comes in and he comes across, oh, look, it's Frasier from Cheers. Of course he's going to be a great guy. But he betrays our heroes and he sabotages, the escape. And all of a sudden we're like, wait a minute, what is this unsuspecting twist that we're going to be introduced to that allows us in the third act to get this tragic backstory to allow him to very quickly become sympathetic. All of a sudden, I think there was this added layer that we started to get introduced to as opposed to some of the early films that we're talking about, whether it's a Cinderella, Sleeping Beauty, Alice in Wonderland with the Queen of Hearts, whatever it might be, where it's that traditional villain or megalomaniacal tyrant that you'd have. And that continues on, right? So think about some of the other surprise villains. Lotso Huggin' Bear, I hated that guy because I was all down with the strawberry. They came out with the plushes that smelled like strawberry. kudos to you, Disney, because you roped me in. I was like, oh my God, he's a hugger. I'm a hugger. I love Lotso Huggenberry.
And then it turns into a prison movie.
And you're crushed. And I refuse to allow Lotso Huggenberry in the house. But we see it over and over again. King Candy, again, surprise villain. Hans, right?
Syndrome.
Exactly. But it goes on and on. And if you and I was trying to sort of think about who all the surprise villains are. Hans was a surprise villain. I wasn't crazy. I almost felt a little cheated because the reveal was so sort of sudden.
There was no build up.
It didn't build up to it, right? And even his motivation, all he cared about was the throne. It's just sort of a traditional sort of villain trope, and it didn't really advance the plot of Frozen too much.
One twist villain that I'm not a very big fan of is Mayor Bellwether at the end of Zootopia.
So I actually have her on this part of the list because she literally is the wolf in sheep's clothing, right? But that you never saw coming. Like, I don't think anybody expected.
There was just no buildup.
There was no buildup, but there was that. She's the sweet sheep, and she's got this cute little voice.
Came out of nowhere.
She came out of nowhere because she's a throwaway character. She's, doing menial, jobs, and she's
the
pushing
mayor's
paper.
Assistant.
But what you find out is that deep down, this unsuspecting little waifish character is this diabolical mastermind. And I think, look, so there's a lot of, important messaging and overtones in Zootopia, and Bellwether is this incredibly prejudiced person against predators, right? And some of the things that she says are, unfortunately have, far-reaching overtones. And she too is incredibly not just hungry for power, but she's ruthless in her pursuit of it. And she's willing to not just sort of push people out of the way. She's willing to kill anybody. Like, she's willing to kill these prey animals.
To change the public's perception.
Right. She wants to turn people against the predator minority, right? And there's a bit of, again, going a little bit deeper, like there's a sadism to her. But what makes her interesting is that she's not threatening like Maleficent, and she's not fun like Hades. And so her motivation fits in, and so I think she's a great twist villain in terms of the way that I think she's a better twist villain than, for example, Tomatoa from Moana. Like, I love the film. If I could take that scene out, it didn't fit. It was a little disjointed for me, and I think you didn't need that overarching villain in that. I think, we lost the villain's journey, which I think is sometimes as important as the hero's journey to have there. But look, there's other ones. So Stromboli from Pinocchio, I have Big Hero 6 on my list. I have Yokai on here. And if you don't know who Yokai is, he's the alter ego of Professor Callahan, right? And again, we don't necessarily see that coming because he's this friendly, smart guy, daytime, and at nighttime, he's this kabuki-inspired, strong, fast, again, the dark-clothed character that has no problem putting kids in harm's way. He set fire to the building and the exhibits.
He killed Tadashi.
He killed Tadashi. And instead of just saying, hey, wait a minute, why don't we all team up and try and figure out how to get, my daughter out? He decides to just eliminate everybody that's in his way for his own personal pursuits, however sympathetic that might be. And there's the fact that he's not relatable makes him a worse character. Like, it makes him even a worse villain. So you think that you're going to sympathize with him because he lost his daughter, but the fact that he's willing to not only kill Tadashi, kill these kids, and destroy the city for no reason, with no remorse, makes it very, hard to relate to him, right? What makes a lot of the villains interesting is that there's a sense of righteousness that they feel. They think that they are doing the right thing, or at least what they need to do, which makes them more human. Callahan doesn't have that. Like, he does not think he's a villain at all, despite donning the kabuki mask, which, again, there's symbolism in there too, because kabuki masks, the colors on the mask have different symbolism. So the red represents passion. So it's almost literally on his face. He's showing that he is doing this from a personal, passionate, fatherly type of thing. But there's no sense of sympathy for him really at all, because of the way he goes about doing it. Sir Miles Axelrod, Cars 2. Ernesto de la Cruz in Coco. Again, you don't see him being the twist villain. Evelyn Deaver in The Incredibles. Charles Muntz from Up. These are all like twist villains over and over again, and these surprise villains, which is almost starting to become a bit of, I don't want to say an overused trope, but now we're almost expecting, like, okay, who's going to be the surprise villain? Because that's kind of what we're looking for in these films.
I can put you guys on the spot here real quick.
Please do.
Because you made me think. I sort of have one, but can you think of examples of the opposite, where you have the villain and the twist is they're not the villain and they're actually a good person? I'm not talking about one that got redemption. I'm talking about someone who you thought was the villain. They never were the villain, and they were actually the good person. Can you think of it? Like the alternate twist, the other twist. See, I put you on the spot. And I can only come up with a sort of one.
So tell me who your sort of one is.
My sort of one is...
But I'm not sure if I can articulate it.
I think I have one.
My sort of one is Roz, and that doesn't really fit into it, but in the sense of a character that you thought was just not a villain, but mean, and that's all she was. But then you find that at the end, she's, actually the one behind and on the good side, that kind of thing. But I was trying to think of an actual, you thought this was the villain for the better part of the movie, just to find out they're not. And I thought of the Ben Kingsley as the faux Mandarin, but not really. He wasn't a good guy in the end. He just wasn't really who he thought he was. But Nicholas, sounds like you got one.
No, I was
Maybe?
just thinking about one.
Who would it be again? Talk it out.
Like, I don't know if you would get this, but it's a Marvel.
Go
In
ahead.
Infinity War, it paints Thanos as the protagonist. I know he's a villain overall, but in Infinity War, like, he is the main character in the movie. Like,
Well,
I was thinking about it.
You can almost say that Nebula goes from villain to heroine, whichever sort
That's
of
a redemption, though.
timeline. Well, it's a different timeline.
Yeah.
Which Nebula is it really? It's interesting that you say. I would have to sort of really
But think about that.
think about it. Because I keep, for some reason, I keep thinking about Captain Hook, because Captain Hook, it's no mistake that the voice of Captain Hook is the voice of the Darlings' parents. Well, I don't know. I know what I want to say, but I'm not. Captain Hook is this dangerous, pirate, revenge-seeking bad guy. But the voice of Captain Hook, the father, really deep down loves his children, even though he might come across as a bit of a bad guy to them in the early scenes.
Yeah. I'm sure there's one out there.
I'm sure there's one. People are screaming.
I'll think about it. Yeah, I'm sure there's so many. Well, I tell you, like the flip side, you said the twist of who's not the villain, and all of a sudden they are the villain is becoming pretty common anymore. Just like the other one, unrelated to villains, is all right. Who are they related to? Like, you're just waiting for that to happen anymore. But this twist might be I think we got a movie idea here. We should flesh it out and work on it.
I was hoping, when I was watching Tangled for the first time. I was sort of hoping that Mother Gothel was not going to be the bad person that she was being portrayed. Like, it almost seemed so obvious. I'm like, oh, there's going to be a twist, and she's really going to be the good guy, and she's going to come back, and she's going to help Rapunzel and Flynn Rider later. And, well, obviously it never happened, but because there was something, you know, despite her being dark and having a great singing voice, there was something charming about her, despite the fact that she was, you know, a master manipulator and locked her in the tower for her entire life. Despite those things, she was actually a very nice person.
Other than that, yeah.
So there's a couple, I think we just have to quickly mention that I'm surprised we're not.
There's one you haven't brought up again, which I thought you were.
Well, there is one that I'm going to get to that I'm saving for last. And I think that for me, it is unquestionably the best, best Disney villain.
Yeah.
Cruella de Vil, I think, is going to be on people's lists. Look.
Oh, yes.
She killed puppies. Like, that's all you need to say.
That's bad news. That's bad.
She's got very bad road rage, and she's incredibly vain. Bit of a sociopath.
Road rage.
A lot of things wrong with her. I think Queen of Hearts could also be on the list. I'm surprised none of you mentioned Gaston. I think Gaston is... And I did not have him on my list because I don't like him as a villain. The character for me is... The childlike entitlement and arrogance and very stalker-like, you know, manipulative person that he is. I just don't like the character, and I don't know if he necessarily rises up to the level of full-fledged villain on the same scope and scale that we are talking about. Yes, I understand what his intentions are and what he tried to do, but he did not necessarily rise up to the level of, I think it's time to reveal my number one.
Well, wait, before you get there, because I'm all aflutter. I can't wait to hear. Is maybe the Beast an answer to the question I posed?
Maybe he is.
Because I think for the most part of that film, you thought the Beast was the villain because it's the Beast, and he never was. And it turned out Gaston was. Maybe. So maybe that's why Gaston maybe doesn't get the full. He gets the honorable mention list on the villains because, you know, for the most part, he was a jerk the whole time, but, you know, unlike Scar, Jafar, Ursula, you know, all these people, they were just the villain all the way through the movie and so forth. There you go.
Kronk,
number one.
Kronk is he a non? I'm really trying to stretch to try and find an anti-villain that you brought up.
Kronk's just a lovable.
He is a lovable guy. He's David.
He's
Putty,
a sidekick.
So look,
the sidekicks aren't evil. Iago isn't evil.
I think the personification of evil is in my number one. And I think without question, Judge Claude Frollo from Hunchback of Notre Dame is without a doubt the ultimate villain.
100%.
And that's not who I thought you were going to say.
Without a doubt. And there is a lot that to unpack about him, and I want to sort of dance delicately on some parts. He is incredibly scary. He's a sinister character, and what makes him so scary is that he is a human being with no powers, with no weapons, with nothing, you know, nothing that makes him special, right? And almost the fact that he holds himself out as a religious person and sort of, you know, claiming that he's sort of doing God's work almost makes him even more evil, right? He is this, you know, absolute power corrupting absolutely and using his position of authority for his own purposes. More so, on top of that, taking any of his intentions away, there are two things really that I think make him so incredibly evil. Like his cruelty to Quasimodo is not just merciless, it's borderline inhumane. And that alone, I think, would make him rise to the level of, you know, supervillain, right? I think there's no remorse. He is incredibly heartless. There is nothing redeeming about him at all. He is selfish and greedy, but there is something genuinely terrifying about him, because you almost could imagine him being a real person, like a story that's being told about a real person. And his obsession with Esmeralda, and I want to delicately use the word lust, because that's what it is. And that song, Hellfire, is one of the best, worst villain songs anywhere. Like, it's a scary song. It's a scary scene when he sings
with
that.
All the people in the red robes just like looking over it.
It is. There's nothing playful about his malevolence at all. Hades is the anti-Frollo, right? Everything about him is fun and funny. There is nothing cartoonish about his wickedness at all.
He does not make anything. He's just the embodiment, the personification of evil.
And he has this incredible sense of vanity that makes him so much darker. He believes that and this is his words, that he is so much purer than the common, vulgar, weak, licentious crowd. Like, he believes that he is above every other. And when he can't get what he wants, right? In the, like, if I can't have you, nobody can. He's willing to not just banish her, kill her. He's willing to burn Esmeralda at the stake with the rest of Paris. Like, if you don't love me, I'm going to burn you, and I'm going to burn down the city of Paris at all. And I think the fact that he is, unlike a lot of these other villains, he is in a position of authority. So he is empowered by his position and this sense of self-righteousness, both internally because of what he wants, and whether it's true or not that he believes he's doing this virtuous work of God, makes him so, like, he's not just he is frightening.
Originally, he was supposed to be a priest, but then they changed it because they didn't want to make a really evil priest, because that would be terrible.
That would be a problem.
Yeah.
So was he on your list at all, Tim?
No, I have a couple more actually on my list. I thought you were, I don't know why, because I thought you were alluding to Dr. Facilier from Princess and the Frog, which in retrospect, I think, well, probably isn't on your list, but that's what I thought you were going to mention.
I wanted him to be, right? I wanted him to be, because I love that movie, right? But yeah. I don't think Facilier qualifies, matched up against some of the other people that are on the list.
Well, I have a couple more. I don't know if I'm going out of turn, or is it?
No, it's a free for all at this point.
Last round, my free for all. I had two left, and they're very different. One was in the lighthearted villain vein, but popular, is Nightmare Before Christmas, Oogie Boogie. Everybody loves him. But the other one, this was my most evilest evil, and this is because there are many of the characters we talk about have a bizarre motivation for being evil, or they possess powers. Whatever the reason, they're not real life. You're not. I'm pretty sure a Dark Lord of the Sith isn't walking around my neighborhood right now, ready to.
Listen, man, it's 2020. Anything is possible. So
that's
you
true.
Never know.
But my vote for, and this might be one of the most hated villains in all of Disney cinematic history, is Lady Tremaine from Cinderella. Mm-hmm. And at least to me, that one of the reasons why she is so terrifying and so evil is that she could be a real person. Mm-hmm. Like, there's nothing supernatural or bizarrely motivational behind her. She's just, an evil person. And we've known mean people. Now that she's mean beyond any reasonable sense of the word. But I think what's terrifying is that we can all relate, either personally or through people we know, family and step and all that kind of thing. And yes, the Disney stepmother is a cliche, long has been a cliche. And it's actually when it doesn't happen that the villain is not the evil stepmother. That was a nice revelation when that started to be the case. But be that as it may, you just look back at that movie and you watch it and you think about her and the stepsisters and all that. And it's just that much more terrifying. I think it's because we can all relate to it on a certain level. And it's not that outlandish that something like that you either would live through or people that live through that kind of thing. It's just that it's so real, I guess, is what makes it so terrifying. It's
right,
not
because the psychological abuse, right, just like for Quasimodo, the psychological abuse doesn't have to be physical. It's and unfortunately, it's sadly relatable. I think too much, and I think that is what makes her so incredibly wicked. Yeah. So those are I think that we kind of went through so many honorable mentions during this. You kind of did whip through all mine. So, I think the only other one that just bears a quick mention is Chernabog. Oh, yeah. And I think Chernabog is, he does not get a lot of screen time. He may arguably have the best theme song. I love Night on Bald Mountain. But he is sort of meant to be that pure representation and personification of evil, right? There's no motive. There's no redemption. There's no sympathy at all. He just wants to, he's just a destructive character, based on, the Christian devil and the Slavic sort of god of night. The size, again, like Darth Vader, right? It's like that size. It's the black. It's ominous. He's got these sort of unlimited powers, except if the church bells ring and the sun comes out, he's like a little bit of a vampire. But I think for a lot of people, just when you think of Disney villains, he might be one that comes to mind.
Dormammu, did I say that?
Dormammu?
That's my other one. Dormammu.
He's come to bargain.
As Chris Pratt. No, as Chris Pratt would say, Dormammu is so. No.
Look, I think there's other, and I'm sure people are.
There's so many more. But,
yeah. What about Ursula? What about What
about her? Oh, yeah, we forgot Ursula. Sorry, Ursula.
At the end of the day, most Disney villains are really good.
It's good and they're bad. They're good and they're bad. They're
good at being bad.
Shan Yu is.
It's good to be bad.
Yeah, and look, there's ones that
the hunter from Bambi.
I was say man isn't bad. Of course, Nicholas had to go to Bambi, right? You had to really bring it down at the end. But I think that's part of the fun and this again, this progression of what villains have gone through over the years, right? If you sort of think about Disney movie making and a lot of the films that we're talking about going all the way back to the beginning, there were these very clear, overt villains. There are the bait and switch villains. We've got some, to a certain degree in some of the films we were talking about, Ralph Breaks the Internet and even some of the other ones, almost sort of abandoning the idea of the, inherent overt villain. And maybe, like you said, Tim, maybe, Wreck-It Ralph starts to bring in this new stage and this evolution of the Disney villain, because you can only sort of go to that certain, well of the tropes so many times. And so maybe Disney is starting to evolve what the villain is going to be, maybe this sort of misguided hero, and that journey and sort of this amalgam of the hero and the villain kind of coming together. I want to know from you, listener, our friend who's sitting at the table with us, who for you is your top Disney villain? And again, how you define, is it the best of the best? Is it the worst of the worst? What are some of those elements that you bring into it? Whether it's power, motivation, redemption, backstory, relatability, sympathy, relationship, maybe to the hero and heroine in the story. All those different things can come together to help define for you what is your favorite or your worst Disney villains. I would love to hear your thoughts on this. A couple different ways you can do it. One, I'd love for you to call the voicemail at 407-900-9391. That's 407-900-WDW1. Make your argument. Tell me why we're wrong, who should have been one on the list, who we forgot, or why your villain should be number one. I want to hear that passion in your voice. I'll also pose this question in our community on Facebook at wdwradio.com/community. That is the Box People group. It's a very warm, welcoming, friendly place, and would love to have a conversation of who is the ultimate Disney villain and why. And then when you're done doing all of that, I need you to go and visit Tim at his home at guidetothemagic.com, where Tim Foster, a little bluebird or giant evil dragon, may have told me that something old is new again.
Something old is new again, including guidetothemagic.com, which is actually relaunching in a week or two. So this is really ahead of time. But yes, Guide to the Magic for Kids is coming back. The new version will be out. Oh, in a couple months or so. The official announcement's coming in a few weeks, but this is our sneak preview announcement. But all new, it's going to have Rise of Resistance, Mickey Minnie's Runaway Railway, a whole new set of attraction stickers, a whole new set, and pins and other books and all kinds of goodness coming. So we'll have lots more details coming up soon, but this might be the worldwide announcement of the new book. So we're very excited about it and hope you are too. And I think there's lots of great stuff coming.
I can say, as a child who used one of the Guides in the Magic's books, they were very fun, and I love them very much.
And
so.
Nicholas, back me up. Look, I still have not one, but two copies of Guide to the Magic sitting on my shelf.
Well, that's great. Hopefully somebody else will get.
I mean, it's holding the shelf up, which is why they're sitting there. So don't move them.
They're sturdy, and they can use for. No, we're very excited. We're very, 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 and actually, there's a lot of news coming out with Guide to the Magic to come. We'll keep everyone posted, but that's the announcement for now. The new book is on the way. We're very excited.
I like the teaser trailer, and look, Tim, had it not been for Guide to the Magic, we would not be here. I say this all the time. I remember the first time I met you in that tiny little ballroom at the Swan Hotel, those many years ago. Just meek little Tim Foster walking in, like with his little Guide to the Magic book under his arm. You were like a little Syndrome. You were so cute.
I was.
And we got to talking, and that was.
Unfortunately, you did not say, "Go away, kid. You're bothering me." No, you know what's funny?
Go home, Timmy.
that book you speak of, my prototype, is sitting on my shelf, and I'm looking at it right now.
Aw.
And I found it the other day, and I pulled it out, and I was looking at it, and I remember showing.
Well, who would have known it was the beginning?
It's massive. It's like 3 times the size of the actual book, as it turned out. But
it was the beginning of a beautiful friendship
that
I am incredibly grateful for. I will certainly link to guidetothemagic.com in this week's show notes, and certainly in the WDW Radio community on the Facebook. Nicholas Peter Mangello, always fun having you around, and you're more than just a pretty face who likes to do food reviews.
The real number one villain is me.
Nicholas is going to be the twist villain. Well, guys, thank you so much for being here. This was a lot of fun, really hopefully made for an interesting discussion for you, the listener. Would love to hear your thoughts as well. And Tim, we will certainly do this again very, very soon.
Absolutely. Evil chuckle.
Who has the best maniacal laugh?
Oh, man.
Mwah, ha, ha.
Who had not, I don't mean out of you two knuckleheads. I mean, what villain has the most evil laugh?
The villain from the Muppets movie.
Maniacal laugh.
There you go.
Maniacal laugh. Maniacal laugh. Maniacal laugh.
I'm going to have to pose that question too. As the most evil laugh of any of the Disney villains, because some villains don't laugh at all.
I don't remember older Anakin ever chuckling at the
Why do you have to end
little
with him?
Little Annie?
Why you gotta?
I'm sorry.
Don't call him Annie, please.
Yippee!
How about Hades?
Yippee!
Hades is left. I'm trying to get your mind off.
Thank you. Even
how sentimental. You know, I haven't been this choked up since I got a hunk of moussaka caught in my throat. Huh? So is this an audience or a mosaic? Hey, how you doing? Looking good. Nice dress.
Jafar. Even Jafar has a Jafar has a pretty good sense of humor, actually.
Top 10 villain laughs coming soon.
I think it's time to say goodbye to Prince Abubu.
Scar?
Can I say Iago?
You could.
There you go. That was terrible. King Candy.
King Candy!
Milk my duds! It's Wreck-It Ralph!
Yeah? Who are you, the guy that makes the donuts?
Please. No, I'm King Candy.
So you're a fan of pink?
Salmon. Salmon, that's obviously salmon. What are you doing here?
Like fire, hellfire, this fire in my skin, this burning desire is turning me to
It's time for our Walt Disney World Trivia Question of the Week, where I invite you to test your knowledge of Walt Disney World's history, or see how well you pay attention to the details, sometimes in what you see, hear, maybe even taste. If you think you know the answer, you can enter via our online forum for a chance to win a Disney Prize package. And of course, before we get to this week's question, we're going to go back, review last week's, and select our winner. So last week, I didn't just take you to Walt Disney World, but I also took you back in time, literally and figuratively, because I gave you a quote from a now extinct attraction that just, by the way, happens to deal with time. And rather than me just say the quote to you again or do a really, really bad impersonation, I'm going to play it for you and then see if you can figure out who it is and where it's from.
Hey, timekeeper, this is beautiful, but where's Jules?
Relax, I've got him right here.
Strap in, Julie.
Oh, timekeeper! I'm flying!
You can't fly. If you had wings, I'd let you go. Sweetheart, sit down, will you? Don't make me come over there. I'll turn this helicopter right around right now.
Hang on to your whiskers, Jules. Woo-hoo!
Now, even if that show doesn't sound familiar, some of the voices might, because that's right, that's Rhea Perlman from Cheers and Robin Williams as the Timekeeper. And that is the attraction that this came from. This was a Circle Vision 360 film that wasn't just presented at Walt Disney World, but actually 3 parks around the world, including Disneyland Paris and Tokyo Disneyland. Now, there's a lot of great story and history and details about Timekeeper I'd love to share with you here, but it actually deserves its own show, which it got back on show 174. We did a Wayback Machine segment, talked all about Timekeeper, how it came to be, and maybe how and why it ended up being removed from the Walt Disney World theme parks. But back to this week's trivia question. I took all of the correct entries, randomly selected one, and once again, you were playing for all of my digital products, which is my 102 Ways to Save Money for and at Walt Disney World book. All 7 of my virtual audio walking tours of Magic Kingdom, where I take you with me on hour plus, almost 2 hours for Tomorrowland, walking tours of each of the parks, all with the binaural 3D sounds behind you. I talk about the history, the details, the secrets, and some of the overlooked experiences there. I'm also going to send you a WDW Radio vinyl sticker, a Magic Band cover, and a mystery prize from my personal collection. I'm in the process of putting a number of those items up each week on eBay. I'm going to pull one of those out, add that to your prize package, and if you want to find out my eBay auctions each week. You can go to WDWRadio.com/eBay. 10 new auctions each week. They start and end Sunday nights at 9 p.m. They are $1 starting bid, no reserve. There is theme park memorabilia going back to the early 70s. There's books, artwork. There's some Star Wars, maybe a little Star Trek stuff in there again. Again, 10 new auctions each week, WDWRadio.com/eBay. But last week's winner, randomly selected, is Dan Taliaferro. So Dan, congratulations. You used the online form, so I have your shipping address. I will get your prize package out to you right away. If you played last week and didn't win, that's okay, because here's your next chance to enter in this week's Walt Disney World Trivia Challenge. So this week we're talking about villains, and obviously the question for the trivia contest has to be about villains as well. And one of the ones that we didn't really touch on very much, but I have a feeling she is very high on a lot of your lists, is Ursula. And if you remember in The Little Mermaid, when Ursula transformed from the ugly sea witch into the beautiful woman to fool the prince into marrying her, she obviously took on a different name. So tell me, what was the name that Ursula used when she turned into the woman to fool the prince? You have until Sunday, July 5th at 11:59 p.m. Eastern to go to WDWRadio.com. Click on this week's podcast. Use the online form there. Again, you are going to play for the books, the audio tours, the vinyl sticker, the Magic Band cover, and a mystery prize from my personal collection. Also, don't forget that if you like playing trivia, please go check out my Instagram stories every day for daily Disney trivia. They're easy, they're fun, multiple choice, takes just a couple of seconds to play. Really a nice way to test your knowledge, maybe even learn something along the way, and hopefully even brighten your day a little bit more. So good luck and have fun. That's going to do it for this week's show. Thank you so much for taking the time to tune in this and every week. Please don't forget to be part of the community and conversation by going to WDWRadio.com/community and joining our Facebook group there. Speaking of community, I want to thank some of the new and longtime members of our WDW Radio Nation family. I appreciate your love, friendship, support, and help. I want to thank some of the new and longtime members: Angela Gonzaruk, Marissa Santorelli, Jim Hart, Jennifer Bryant, Jackie Daniels, and Ian Chidley. I sincerely appreciate all of your help, and if you want to find out how you can not only help the show, but get exclusive rewards every month, including scavenger hunts, monthly trivia quests, we have a private Facebook group, Magic Band covers, stickers, logo gear, t-shirts, monthly care packages from Walt Disney World, as well as our exclusive live video group calls every month, and lots more. You can visit WDWRadio.com/support. Don't forget that this is obviously completely optional, but a great way to help support the show. And remember that a portion of your contribution, which can start at as little as $1 a month, goes to our Dream Team project to benefit the Make-A-Wish Foundation of America. If you have a question you'd like me to answer on the show, you can email me, lou@WDWRadio.com, or call the voicemail we heard on the air at 407-900-9391. That's 407-900-WDW1. You can also connect with me on social. I am at Lou Mongello on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, Pinterest, and LinkedIn. And don't forget to like the WDW Radio Facebook page at facebook.com/WDW Radio. Obviously, even with everything going on, I still believe that nothing beats a handshake and a hug, and hopefully one day we'll be able to get back to that. In the meantime, stay tuned for our next virtual Meet of the Month coming soon. But don't forget about our next WDW Radio event, which is our Marvel Day at Sea cruise coming up this January out of Miami for 5 nights. If you go to WDWRadio.com/events, you can find out more and get a free, no obligation quote from our friends over at MEI and Mousefan Travel. They are my official recommended travel provider. It's who I recommend because it's who I've used and trusted for more than 13 years. Whether you want to come on the cruise or a future event with us, or you're planning your next trip to world, land, or anywhere on the planet, Becky and her team of agents give you the best possible prices, all available discounts, all at no cost to you. More importantly, you see, and I think realize now, the importance of having a travel agent, not just there to help you answer questions, but if something does go wrong, they're there for you in their corner. Again, visit them at mousefantravel.com. Becky and her team are there to help you. I am here to help you any way that I can. If you visit LouMongello.com, you can find out how I can help you turn what you love into what you do with one-on-one mentoring. I still have one spot left for our weekly 6-person mastermind group. Stay tuned for more information about upcoming events, including our retreat and weekend workshop in Walt Disney World. And in the meantime, if you're looking for a speaker for your business, online event, workshop, or for your students, again, you can visit LouMongello.com to find out more. And as always, my friend, and you are my friend, whether we have met in person or not yet, all I ask is that if you like the show, please help spread the word, let others know about it, tweet out or share a link on Facebook to this or your favorite episode, and if you can, take just a couple of seconds to rate and review the show over on Apple Podcasts. Thanks to you, we have more than 2,500 5-star reviews. So important. Please help keep them coming. I want to thank some recent reviewers, including Traveler Photog, who says, I'm a new longtime listener because I found the podcast late last summer. Absolutely fell in love. I'm a former cast member. Love connecting with other Disney fans and Disney Parks nerds. Not only does this podcast bring us magic every week, but the community Lou has built, you guys built it, is incredible. Makes me feel so happy even when I can't be in the parks. I love that Lou titles a lot of his episodes Top 10 and somehow always loses track, like this week, of what number they are, and probably goes over because I feel the same excitement and could never narrow anything down to just 10. His guests are absolutely phenomenal to listen to and full of so much information that I'm either always learning something new or taking a walk back down memory lane to something I hadn't thought about in years. The show makes me feel closer not only to my Disney family of past and current cast members, but to my actual family as I share the info I learned with them. I love that you pay it forward. This podcast helps us have new experiences each time we visit the parks, and I'd be lying if I didn't say that I'm also here for the food and cocktails. If you're a Disney fan and this is the podcast you're looking for, Traveler Photog, thank you so much. I seriously appreciate that. Gosling71 says, I've been listening to Lou for 10 years this month. Happy anniversary. He's informative, caring, and entertaining. You cannot get much more positive than this. This is needed now more than ever. Love the recent tie-in to prop culture. Made me binge watch that on Disney+. And Dan Purser MD says, the best podcast ever. I've literally listened to all these. Every single one. That's how he wrote it. In all caps, with periods. And more than once, Lou Mongello and Becky from MouseFan Travel and all of his smart friends and the amazing top 10 lists, really top 18s or 20, he says, are fun to listen to on my long walks and drives when I'm working around the house. I love that they went to Japan and love Tokyo Disneyland and Sea as much as I and my family do. These are a must for anyone who loves Disneyland, World Cruises, Tokyo, Shanghai, Hong Kong. Plus, Lou's humor and self-deprecation are a great model for others who wish to grow their podcast. Using his approach, I've gone from a few thousand to upwards of 200,000 watching my podcast. Wow, that is amazing. Send me the link. I want to check it out, Dan. He says, Lou Mongello rocks. Thank you. And so does Becky, with lots of question marks and exclamation points. Thank you once again. And finally, SB Patrick from Canada says, love the podcast. After just discovering WDW Radio, I'm kicking myself for not finding it earlier. Not only does Lou and his guests provide wonderful insights on all things Disney, they bring a feeling of warmth and community that I've never gotten from a podcast anywhere else. During these troubled times, it's been a positive way to start my day, and I thank you. SB Patrick, Gosling, Dan Purser, and of course, Traveling Photog. Thanks to all of you as well. And remember that positivity is contagious, and you are the ones who, I think, make that ripple effect happen and pass it on to other people. So thank you to everybody who has reviewed the show. And if you want to leave a review, just search for WDW Radio and Apple Podcasts or go to wdwradio.com/iTunes. It'll show you exactly how to do it there. And continuing on with what I was saying, look, that positivity and that community and that family and that warmth and that welcoming is thanks to and because of you, just like this show, right? This show happens thanks to you and because of you and for and with and many times by you, and I appreciate that, and I do hope that it does bring some happiness and positivity into your day, into your week, and you pay that forward. Let that ripple effect continue, and you pay that forward to other people, whether they be family, friends, or even maybe especially complete strangers. And if there's some way that I can help you or show my appreciation, please let me know. But until next time, I hope to see you on Wednesday night at 7:30 p.m. Eastern for WDW Radio Live on Facebook. So until next time, have a great week. I love and appreciate you. See ya.
Hey, Lou, please use this one. Hi, Lou. It's Brad and Amy from Wisconsin. We just got done with a wonderful visit at the Walt Disney Hometown Museum in Marceline, Missouri. We're supposed to be at Disney World right now. But since we can't be there, we thought we'd come to Marceline, and it just brought a little bit of the magic back. We hope everyone that listens to the show as part of the box gets a chance to visit Marceline. It's really an awesome place and really connects you with Walt. Thanks for your show and all that you do, and for spreading the positivity and the Disney love. Thanks again, Lou. Hi, Lou.
Hey, Lou. It's Christine Morrison from Flowertown, Pennsylvania. It's Wednesday night, 11:30. I just wanted to call in before I went to bed. I went for a run during the show tonight, so I was watching you guys while I was running. I was really listening because it's hard to watch and run at the same time. But it was a good show. I enjoyed your top 5 live this evening of the top stage shows in Disney World. And I have to say, I know that the Little Mermaid show is not long for this world, but it is my favorite because I was blown away by that show when I first went to Disney World. It was my favorite princess movie. I know every single line of that movie. I actually just watched it this morning, and it was the very, very first thing I watched when Disney Plus launched. Tonight, I watched the latest episode on the gallery, which was episode 8, I think, and I think it's my favorite episode so far. It talks about all the little Easter eggs in The Mandalorian and where they pulled from different aspects of Star Wars, different droids and props, and it was so cool. And the coolest thing is that the X-Wing that is in Galaxy's Edge was actually used in the making of The Mandalorian. They actually sat in that cockpit and filmed the actors. I did not know that until tonight, about 10 minutes ago. How awesome is that? So next time I go to Galaxy's Edge and you see that wing fighter, there you go, from The Mandalorian. So, haha, little tidbit. Anyway, everybody have a great night. It's going to be a really busy weekend for me. Lots of doggies coming. I did my park pass reservations today. It went very smoothly. I'm super, super excited. And the kids are excited. We also picked our magic bands and we ordered some really cool ones. And anyway, it was a great day. Have a good one, everybody. Make someone smile. Love all you guys. And I'll see you in the box next week. And I loved your Art Smith interview. I think you should do more interview / food reviews at the same time. I love that concept. I think that is awesome, and you could really do great things with that. So take care. Bye.